You're rolling?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I have a nice little stack of books to talk about here today. Today we're going to be going over what I would like to read this fall. Fall is a very special reading time of year. I think for me and many others, I think fall is a very atmospheric time of year. It's a time of year where the veil feels very thin, and that could be in a spiritual way, or it could just kind of mean in a sort of reflective way the veil between the life you're living now and the lives you could have lived um, if you had made choices different feels very thin. And for that, I think we all choose our reading accordingly. So I have this nice little stack to talk about today, and I am very excited to get to all of these. Will I actually read all of them? Well, that remains to be seen. I always say that I want to read a certain number of books in a certain amount of time, and do I do it? Not always. I'm a very mood driven reader, so this is kind of my best guess for what my moods will be like in the rest of September, October, November, etc. However, it is entirely likely that I will read other things as well, because there will be a book or two that I feel very compelled to read for reasons that are unknown to me or anyone. Yesterday I did do some book shopping, and I was afraid that that was going to throw this stack just completely off. There was a place that I went to yesterday where they had $3 used paperbacks, and I went a little nuts because that's a pretty good price even for used books these days. So it is very likely that I wind up reading some of those. I do plan to make my next video a video discussing all of the books that I bought yesterday in my little day trip to Hudson, New York. However, only one of them has made this stack, which I picked out before I went on that trip, and we will discuss why. But I guess without further ado, let's get into it. Let's get into my little stack of books that I want to read. In my stack, I have some classics, I have some more modern lit fic, I have some books that are kind of creepy and atmospheric. I also have some books that, as I said, are just kind of reflective, slow, thoughtful, etc. All the sorts of moods that I think that are really reasonable to be in during the autumn. So let's get into it, shall we? I think first and foremost is this tiny, tiny little novella, Chess Story by Stefan Zweig. I have never read anything by Stefan Zweig before, actually, and I felt compelled to pick up the first Stefan Zweig because I saw Grand Budapest Hotel for the first time. It's the Wes Anderson film. I saw that for the first time a couple of months ago, and supposedly that was kind of inspired by Stefan Zweig, and I was just so charmed and enchanted by the film that I was like, well, I guess I have to read some Stefan Zweig. So I decided to order this. I figured this would be a good place to start. It's one of his most famous works, and it's also just very thin. I figured it would be a nice little bite-sized way to see if I enjoy his writing. And so I ordered this from right from the NYRB website when they did their summer sale. But that was back in June. And this cover doesn't look like the cover of a book that you should read in June or July, maybe August. That's marginal, but the vibe is very much giving fall. I have no idea in what season this takes place. I have no idea really much about this book other than it's about chess, but that just feels like a fall read to me. So I will probably get around to this fall. It's less than 100 pages. I think it's like 80 something. So even if my reading plans are completely thrown off, hopefully I should be able to pick this one up. So the next book that I wanted to talk about is Henry James, The Turn of the Screw. I feel like I've been reading a lot more classics this year than years past. However, I feel like I've been reading a lot of 20th century classics, a lot of stuff from the first half of the 20th century, and even a little bit of the second half, some stuff from like the 60s and 70s. But in my never ending quest to be disgustingly well read, I don't want to neglect older classics. This is marginal. I think this was written and published in the 1890s, so it missed being 20th century by, I think, a couple of years. However, 19th century is 19th century. Really, all I know about this is that it's supposed to be creepy and kind of gothic, and I've been kind of into the whole gothic thing recently. I recently read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I think that that was maybe one of the best books that I've read so far this year. So if I wanted to read some more older classics, some 19th century and earlier classics, I figured Gothic literature was a good way to go this fall. So that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I don't really have much more to say about it, and I don't really want to go into it knowing that much more. I think with books that are supposedly kind of spooky and build suspense, it's maybe best to go in knowing as little as possible so you can let the author surprise you, and that is what I intend to do with this. The next book that I wanted to read this fall is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is an entirely vibes based decision. I got this book from a friend a couple of months ago. He had read it and enjoyed it and gave it to me, saying that I would probably also enjoy it. And so I said, okay, sure, I'll read it. It's one that I had seen around and had kind of vaguely been on my radar. It was the sort of book that I assumed that I would probably just come across at the library at the right time and pick it up eventually. But when my friend decided to give me the copy, I said, sure, I'll get around to that soon. And that was a few months ago. So I think that fall is maybe the time to get around to it. Again, I don't know a ton about this. I know that it has some fantasy elements to it, and I believe it takes place in some sort of labyrinth. And honestly, the cover says that this is something that should be read in the fall. I don't know if that is true. Again, this is an entirely vibes-based assumption, but everything that I do know about it says that it's going to be something that's kind of creepy and atmospheric. I'm thinking that this is either like a late October or early November sort of read. But as I said, who knows? I really do jump around and kind of let my moods dictate what I'm going to pick up next. But I have a feeling that October or November could be the correct months to be in the mood for this. So that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Okay, next up is the only book that I got from my little haul yesterday that I wanted to definitely include in this stack. And it wasn't even from the place that had the $3 paperbacks, it was from a new bookstore. I kind of let myself go a little bit crazy with the used books, but in the new bookstore, I think I was very level headed in my purchase decisions. Hopefully, we will see more about that next week when I get a chance to sit down and film that video. But anyway, without further ado, the next book on my fall reading list is Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. Octavia Butler is one of those authors where, upon reading the first ever book that I had, my neighbor's smoke alarm's going off. Okay, it seems to have stopped. False alarm. Upon reading the first book of hers that I had ever read, which is Parable of the Sower back in 2021, I knew that I wanted to make my way through all of her books. And I realized earlier this year that there are a number of authors whose writing I like enough that I want to make my way through the rest of their books. And I've been being really slow about a lot of that. I think there's a part of me that didn't want to read everything that an author has has ever written because I knew I wouldn't get any more after that, especially since a lot of the authors that I have decided that I want to read all of their works by are unfortunately no longer with us. And that includes Octavia Butler. She passed away in 2006. So it's pretty easy to say that we are not getting anything else by her. But I've decided that I want to stop kind of slowly savoring those authors' works because I'm going to run out eventually. And at that point, I can just reread them. And I will have read everything by them, and I can be kind of an expert in their works. I can definitively decide what is their best and really tie together all the different themes that they wrote about throughout their career. So I'm trying not to be afraid of running out of books by an author and actually just just kind of going for it, just kind of reading everything that they have to offer me. And that includes Octavia Butler. And when I saw this yesterday on the shelf, I saw that this was a book that I hadn't read. I have read most of her really popular stuff. I've read Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents. I've read all of her Xenogenesis series. I believe that's what that series is called. It's the series that starts with Dawn. And then I've read one of her Clay's Arc series, but I had not read Fledgling. And Fledgling is a book about a vampire. So I figured reading a book about a vampire by one of my favorite authors whose work that I want to read the entirety of seemed like the perfect thing for fall. So that is how this managed to be the one book out of all of the books that I purchased yesterday to make it into this official stack of fall reads. I definitely think that this is an October read. October feels like the perfect month for vampires. But then keeping going with the October reads, this might be maybe a later this month read, but probably October. I want to read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This will be the third time I have read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. However, the movie adaptation is coming out in, I believe there's a limited theater release on October 17th. I have not looked to see yet if there's going to be any showings in my area that I think I could easily get to. However, I hope so, because it seems like the kind of movie that you need to see in a theater, or at least I need to see in a theater. I'm very excited for this. And if it's not playing in my area or anywhere that I can easily get to, it does come out on Netflix at some point in November. And while I have read this book twice already, I have not read it in a number of years. I think the last time I read it, I was still in undergrad. I did want to reread this anyway. There's a lot of rereads that I want to do that I think I just need the push to reread, because unfortunately, as many rereads as I want to do, there are books that I want to read for the first time. And a lot of times, the curiosity of not really knowing everything about a book pushes those choices over the edge. I'll know I enjoy it, but that's not a gamble. Picking up a book for the first time, now that's a gamble, and that's thrilling. So I think the movie adaptation of this is going to help me push it over the edge, help me finally do that reread for the first time in quite a long time. I think also I will probably reread Wuthering Heights before the movie adaptation of that comes out. I read that book, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, so that one hasn't been as long, but still worth a refresher before that movie comes out. A little nervous about that one. We can talk about it as, it gets closer. But yeah, anyway, if you haven't read Frankenstein, I 100% urge you to pick it up. Even though I have not read it in 7 years, it is a book that I think about very frequently. And I think that it's one of those classics that has just seeped its way into our modern culture so much that it's like a foundational text. Like, this is like the first sci-fi book. That might be disputed. I'm not sure if other people claim that there's a different sci-fi book that is first, but this, either way, is one of the foundational texts in science fiction, and just one of the foundational texts in the Western literary canon. And I think that it was written by a 19-year-old girl. That's just really inspiring and very precious to me. If you've only ever seen Frankenstein as it is depicted in a lot of the more modern interpretations of it, you are really in for a treat when it comes to this, because I find it's a much more nuanced story that explores a lot of deep themes, and I think it very beautifully explores the story of how one man's ego led to disaster, which which um happens a lot. One man's ego and need to recklessly create and do things often does lead to disaster. And I think that that is depicted very beautifully in this story. And as I said, I urge whoever has not read it to pick it up. Next, I wanted to read Hermione by H.D. H.D. is the pen name of poet Hilda Doolittle. This is one of the things that she wrote in prose. This is a semi-autobiographical novel discussing her time shortly after dropping out of college. This was written, I believe, in the pretty early 20th century. It kind of discusses the expectations put on her not only by society, but also her family and what she chose to do instead of the things that people wanted her to do. I have never read anything by Hilda Doolittle. I have not read her poetry. I had not read her prose. However, I think I was browsing at a bookstore somewhere, and honestly, the cover just kind of intrigued me. I was thinking that maybe it would be kind of something dark academia like The Secret History, but that does not really seem to be what this is. It really just seems to be kind of like a reflective book thinking about a time in her life where seemingly everything was a disaster and all was lost. So this is one of those books in the pile that's less creepy and more just like reflective. But I think that the fall is a very reflective time, as I had said. So I am very interested to read this and kind of learn a little bit more about Hilda Doolittle. I don't really know that much about her, but it seems like she brushed with a lot of important literary figures throughout her life. So that could be really interesting to kind of get to. I'm a really big fan of neglected classics, and this kind of seems to fall into that category. I had literally never heard of this, but I dare to say anything that's still in print or has been put back into print after many, many decades probably could be considered a classic. So I would definitely put this in the category of more neglected classics. I think that as my channel progresses, will probably become a theme. I have been very into that, and I've been reading a lot more classics from authors that we've all kind of forgotten about. Well, maybe not all, because clearly someone's still publishing them, but they're not really talked about very much. They're not really discussed. But anyway, that is Hermione by Hilda Doolittle. Hopefully, I will have much more to say about this after I have read it. But yeah, that's that. Okay, next, speaking of little known classics, I think that this might be maybe more well known in its country of origin. However, here I have actually never seen it discussed, and that is Waiting for the Fear by Oğuz Atay. And this is translated from Turkish, and it was translated by Ralph Hubble. And this is one of the NYRB classics. They do a lot of really great stuff in terms of plucking English language books from obscurity, but then also plucking out works that need to be translated. And I believe this is the first works of Oğuz Atay that to be translated into English. This is a collection of short stories, and because it's a collection of short stories, I don't know a ton. However, this cover really just says you have to read this when morale is low. This is in October at the earliest read. This looks like the sort of thing that really just you have to read this when you're feeling very existential. That is entirely based on the cover design, but if I start reading this and it's really light and springy and inspiring, I will honestly write a strongly worded letter to whoever chose the cover to this over at NYRB, because what the hell. Um, but really all I know about this is that the author is widely celebrated in Turkish literature, has been praised by authors with a lot of critical acclaim, and the stories often follow people who are kind of odd and absurd, kind of picks at their psychology a little bit. But out of all of the books, I feel like I certainly should be able to get through this. It's not that long to begin with. None of these are super long, but it's not that long to begin with. But also because it is short stories, I feel like I can kind of read it as a little bit of a palate cleanser between longer works. Um, the ice cream man is driving by. I don't know if you can hear it, but certainly that tells you I'm a fraud for wearing such a sweater right now, because it is warm enough out that you could eat ice cream outside and people would not call you crazy. So, anyway, I think that I could probably read these as little palate cleansers between longer books. So, I think that I should definitely be able to get through this at some point during the fall, just because I can kind of fit it in between other things. But anyway, that is Waiting for the Fear by Oğuz Atay. Lastly, in this video anyway, I wanted to talk about Jawbone by Mónica Ojeda. This is a book that I talked about briefly in my Women in Translation video. I talked about this at the end, where I briefly went over the books on my physical TBR that are by women and in translation. This is a book by an Ecuadorian author, and I have never read anything by an Ecuadorian author before. So that is exciting. As I said in that video, I am very slowly working my way through all of the countries in the world very, very slowly. I know some people do this as a challenge, where they find a book from every single country that they can and then read them all at one go. That is not what I'm doing. I am reading maybe 5 to 7 new countries a year. But eventually, I should be able to read all of them. Maybe I'll speed it up. Maybe I'll speed this up at some point. For me, it's less of like a challenge to complete and more of a way to ensure that I am reading from diverse authors. Because I think when it comes to literature and reading, you can read a very diverse set of authors in the US and within the UK, like people writing in English. And the world is much bigger than that. I think that reading translated literature and reading translated literature from a really wide range of countries can offer some new and interesting perspectives that are important to have if you are to say that you are, well, not only well read, but you read in a diverse way. But anyway, this book, basically what I know about it is about these two girls who have this very intense friendship, and it has some horror elements to it. So I think reading this during the fall would be perfect. This is probably an October read. I've said that about a lot of these, and I know not all of them are probably going to fit into the month of October, but I'm gonna try. I'm really gonna try. I know that this has kind of made its way onto a lot of like weird girl horror, weird girl books, hot girl horror sort of lists, and I don't know about that. I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see. I'm definitely a big proponent of quote unquote weird girl literature, and I'm excited to try this. And if nothing else, I will have read a new book from a new country that I have never read from before, and that's exciting in and of itself. But yeah, I think that is that. If you liked today's video, please consider, maybe subscribing or don't. I don't control your life. But yeah, I hope to be back next time talking about the books that I got yesterday in Hudson. So if you're interested in seeing that, please stick around. And I will see you then. Bye.